So we are recording, and so please be aware of that. Also, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. And today I'm sitting on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. On the call today, we have myself, we have Neil Varcoe and his dog in the background. We have our NewsLab publishing fellow, Miguel D'Souza. I believe we have Anna Freeland, our trends data curator, and of course, John Bergin from the Walkley Foundation, who leads our trading partnership with the Walkleys. And obviously, and of course, we have Anntao Diaz. For those who were on the call last week, Anntao needs no introduction, and I'm hoping that by now you've all hit him up for aerospace app jobs. But if you were not familiar with Anntao, Anntao leads the development of G&I data tool for us. These include news consumer insights, news tagging guide, and real-time content insights that we're going to be talking about today. These have been used by thousands of news publishers around the world. Anttao's focus is to build data frameworks that provide actionable recommendations to news publishers in order to grow their overall audience value. Prior to Google, he worked in IT consultancy and military aeronautics. Those two things do merge. The Venn diagram has Anntao right in the middle of them. He has a master's degree in international business from Toulouse Business School and developed his own VR gaming app. Also in that Venn diagram of VR gaming apps, military aeronautics, and IT consultancy, again, right in the middle of that is Anntao. Please make sure, as I said before, you're muted on the call. If you do have a question, there is a chat box that has already been commenting on my DJing skills. You're welcome to drop a comment or a question into that chat box on the right-hand side, or you can raise your hand at the bottom, and somebody will respond to your question. And with that, without further ado, please welcome Anntao, and over to you, mate.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks for the intro once again. As fun as last time. Nice to meet you all. For those who are new, nice to see you again. For those who were with us last week, as Nick mentioned, my name is Anntao. I'm based on the East Coast of the United States. In New York. We'll be doing and looking at a new tool today, a tool called Real-Time Content Insights, or RCI. If you haven't checked out our past training last week on News Consumer Insight, I would really advise you to do so afterwards. News Consumer Insight, which is our first tool, and the tool that I'll be showing you today, Real-Time Content Insights, play along together, at least philosophically. They operate in the same world. Having seen both, I would say we'll give you the overview of what we do. I had a promise last week that I wouldn't use any slides. I ended up using two. Today, I have no slides. You're seeing my screen. So the rules of the game, just like last week, is going to be exactly the same. I'm going to take or put on a news publisher or content creator's hat today. I'm going to use the tool like if I was one of you, essentially, for you to see like how we assume and expect and hope you'll be making the most out of those data tools. And that's about it. That's what we're gonna do. I gave two warnings last week that I'm gonna disclaimers, not warnings. So I'm gonna make those disclaimers again. The first one is, as you can see, like most of you, I'm at home and my Wi-Fi might fall. So if it does, worry not. Nick can explain all of this on his own, and if he can't, I'll probably be back in a few minutes. The second disclaimer is I'm not an English native speaker, so I apologize in advance for everything that might sound weird, for all the mistakes in grammar, etc., etc. If something actually sounds weird, interrupt me, use the chat box, come out of mute, even if you want. I think, I'd rather make this an interactive session where I can answer questions on the go than answering them at the end. So I think that's it in terms of intro. So I'm gonna go through the tools. I'm gonna do a demo. Once again, interrupt me if something doesn't sound correct, if something sounds weird. just as a heads up, so this is our data tools page where you will find the tools, all the tools that I'll show, real-time content insight. Everything is free. You don't have to pay for anything. That's super important. I think the URL of the website was given in the chat box, but just in case, this is the small URL go.gle/data tools. Actually, I'll write it in the chat box just so you have the small /data tools. There you go. That's a small URL to get there. Last time, what I did was, so I'm gonna close this, scroll down, and I did a demo of News Consumer Insights. So this is News Consumer Insight. News Consumer Insight is all about making sense out of your Google Analytics data. So you plug in your Google Analytics data, and essentially News Consumer Insights gives you recommendations to improve your reader engagement, right? To make your readers stay longer on your site, and then to make your readers come back to your site. That's what we covered last time, this specific tool, NCI. This time, we're going to focus on real-time content insights. I'm going to start calling it RCI just because it's way easier to pronounce. And you can see it says optimize your content in real time. So we'll be talking about content and content performance and essentially data in real time. So this tool particularly tends to be aimed more at the newsroom than purely, subscription and business users on this specific site. Though from the usage that we've seen around the world, it tends to be shared as well. But you'll see specific features were built exclusively for the newsroom and taking into consideration, what journalists might expect. So I'm going to click on try it now, and we're going to get rolling. Actually, you know what? As an example, let's assume keyword blog. So let's assume this is my website, right? The keyword blog, which is the blog from Google. And you can see, it has articles just like any news site. So let's assume that this is my website, because I'm going to make some examples, and I'll use these sites to use my example. I don't want to offend anyone, so I'm not going to use any other sites. I might offend Google, but that's between me and Google. Okay, so let's go to the tool. I'm going to close this for a second and explain what I'm looking at and what I'm seeing. First, let's look on the left. Right, so one first page, and this is the page where I am at the moment. It's called Real-Time Article Performance. A second page called Real-Time Video Performance, so probably all about video. A third page called Historic Performance, and a fourth page called Trends in Your Region. The rest of the buttons, for example, Quick Tips, if I click on it, it just shows you different blue bubbles that explain, essentially, it's kind of like an online tutorial if you want. So that's the quick tips. The documentation guide, if I click on it, it's a longer tutorial. It's a PDF. You can see it here. It's a playbook. It's our guide, which essentially will describe everything that I'll talk about today, right? So it's a repetition. And there's also a few tips on how to make the most of the tool that would really invite to check out. And then there is our privacy policy. So that's what I see on the left, and I'm on real-time article performance. On the top, you can see there is this button here that says default data. Click to select your account. We had the same thing, if you remember, in News Consumer Insights, which I'm going to open as well. Right? It was this thing, not connected to Google Analytics, and you can see the button is here. Click to select your data. Now, what those buttons allow you is to connect your Google Analytics account to the tool. When you do so, essentially, both tools will update to the data that you have access to, right? So if you want to make this relevant for you, you have to connect your Google Analytics account. And the way you do so is by clicking on that button, and we will display the Google Analytics that are associated to the email you use to log in, right? So if the email that you're using to log in to the account, to the tool, has access to your Google Analytics account, you will see your Google Analytics account. The only thing you need to do is select it. I want to be crystal clear. When you connect your Google Analytics account to the tool, you're not sharing anything with me, with my team, or with Google. It's for you and for you only. We don't collect anything. We don't store anything. Once you close the window, everything will be deleted. So it's for you and for you only. So because for confidentiality reasons, I can't show you obviously Google Analytics data from anyone. I have access to Google Analytics accounts from news publishers that have given me access manually. Essentially, they've added me to their accounts, which I'm not going to use. We're going to use the demo data once again for confidentiality reasons. But if I were you, I would click on this button and connect your Google Analytics account. So let's start with what sorry, there was a question. I'm going to ask answer the questions on the fly. And it says, does video content show on this page too? Video content shows on the second page, real-time video performance, and I'll cover that in a second. With a bit of an asterisk on that answer, and I'll answer that in a second. So let's look at what I see first, right? So let's assume I've connected my Google Analytics account. I see real-time article performance. This is what I see, right? So I see 5 images. Essentially, those are my top 5 articles on my site that I just connected the data from. You can see my first article is called "Adult Education Comes of Age," etc., etc. Right now on this specific article, so right now 7:15 p.m. East Coast time of the US, I have 300 real-time readers, right? This is my second article, my second most popular article on my site, right? This is on my site because this is from my Google Analytics account. Why You Never See School, that actually works. I have 123 real-time readers. Third article, I have 38. Fourth article, I have 38, and fifth article, sorry, I have 35, right? So they're just ranked on how many real-time readers you have on every single article. What we do with the image is actually the image that is associated to the article that you've published that is a concern here. Typically the image that you use for social purposes, right? So when a user shares one of your article, that article has an image, and this is what you'll see here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are my top 5 articles. There's actually a pretty cool feature. If you scroll down a little bit, it says Launch Newsroom View. So if I click on it, this goes full screen, and this is updating every 3 minutes. So that's typically a feature that we see and that we've built for Newsroom. Newsrooms tend to have a big screen on the floor, and we've seen many newsrooms use this on the big screen. Since this is updating, you can see in real time, right, how your readers on your site are moving from one article to the other, like what's the performance of your top 10 articles, since this is only showing the top 10. Now, some of you might have also noticed that we have some colors and some icons behind or below the data of every single article, which is what I'm going to cover now. So I'm going to remove the full screen. You can see, for example, that my first article and my second article have an L, right, associated. And you can see the third, the fourth, the fifth have a C. Now, for those who were there last week for News Consumer Insight, if I go back to News Consumer Insights, I'm going to zoom in just for a second, right? You can see from a color perspective, right? Purple, blue. It's essentially, it's taking the same idea. Sorry, there was a bit of lag in the Hangout, so I was saying purple and blue. We're taking the same philosophy that News Consumer Insight. This is to indicate what type of readers are primarily on each article, right? So in News Consumer Insights, remember, we had casual readers and loyal readers, right? Casual readers, users who came once across the last 30 days. Loyal readers, users who came at least twice across the last 30 days. So this is indicating that out of the 300 real-time readers that are on my article right at this moment, most of them are loyal readers, right? So this article, that content is impacting primarily my core audience, my loyal, right? And that's important, of course, because those are the ones that have the highest propensity to subscribe, to donate. They're the ones who spend the most amount of time, who come the most often. So that also generate the most amount of ad revenue per user, right? Which is why it's important to serve that specific audience. Same idea with my second article. It's still an L, and you can see how, the conclusion is that this is only indicating that on the third article, that out of those 38 real-time readers, most of them are casual readers. Essentially, most of them are new readers on my site. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It probably indicates that that specific content is allowing me to acquire new readers, right? To touch potential readers that I haven't engaged with in the past, or at least not in the last 30 days. And this is the only purpose of those icons, is to quickly identify who's reading what, right? Because if we go back to News Consumer Insights from last week, the logic behind it was essentially to grow loyalty across the site, right? To transform those casual readers, to retain those casual readers and transform them into loyal readers, and then what we call brand lovers being the users who came at least 15 times across the last 30 days. So the most loyal type of readers you can get. So that's literally just the first icon, just to give context behind the numbers. Let's look at the second one. The second one indicates recirculation, right? So just so everyone's clear what I mean by recirculation, I'm on an article, right? And instead of a classical, web usage, I finished this article. This is my first article across my visit. I close the window. Recirculation, 0, right? That article did not take me to another article or to another page. To recirculate, I'm assuming it's a verb in English. So I'm going to scroll down. I would have to click on this, right? So recirculation indicates the potential of a story to take, or a page. Important. Those I'm talking about stories, but those are actually pages on your site, right? So your homepage potentially could be there amongst your top 5, or your your category pages could be among the top 5. But back to the recirculation. So what recirculation is indicating is essentially the chances or probability that a reader would go from this page to another one. Now, if I go back to the tool, to real-time content insights, you can see that recirculation, in certain cases, it's green, and in certain cases, it's red. And what is that indicating? Well, pretty easily, it's indicating that the recirculation of this story is in green because it's above average compared to the other stories. And recirculation on this specific story is in red, which means it's below average. Now, recirculation per se might not be a huge issue, right? Sometimes a story is self-contained and self-serving, right? It doesn't necessarily lead to anything else. And having said that, we usually recommend, the best case scenario is that users don't stop at one story, they go to another one, right? So essentially, once again, the question here that we want to trigger for our users of real-time content insight is there something that we can do on those specific stories, right? Actually, on those 3 who have a below average recirculation, right? What's at fault here, right? Is it, for example, the position of those specific things that you probably all have, right? The related stories, right? The related stories or content that you might be interested in as a reader. You can see typically on the example that I'm showing you, this is a terrible implementation of a recirculation widget. Why? Because chances are, right? Look at how long this article is, right? Chances are only 10%, 5%, 10, 15%, let's say, I want to be positive, of users make it to the end of the page. Right, so if the most amount of users actually drop off somewhere, let's say here, right, I'm going to be nice, at the middle of the page, right, I never saw what's the best content that I could be interested in, what are the things that I might be interested in as a reader. So there are no chances for me to recirculate apart from scrolling all back up or all back down, right? So back to this point, if this is red, right, chances are, because recirculation is below average on certain stories, there are things that I might be addressed and acted on to improve that. Neil, should I stop? Were there any questions, or can I continue? Because I saw there were a few questions.
Yeah, look, there's a really relevant one, Anntao. Scott Purcell says the page speed circles for us are red, but say above average page speed, and the green says below average page speed. Is that a bug?
Yes. No, it's not. That's a great question, and I'm actually moving that. So the page speed question that was just done was around the third icon, right? The third icon indicates page speed, right? Essentially, it indicates how slow or how fast this story is compared to the rest. So here it's in red, but it does say above average page speed, right? And why is that? Because, well, if the average is 2 seconds, right, and you are at 3 seconds, right, you are above average, and that's a bad thing. Speed-wise, you want to be low, right? You want to be below average. You want to be at 1 second or at 2 seconds, but you never want to be above your speed. I see that Scott says, okay, yeah. So essentially, speed here is indicated just like recirculation with a color code, right? So this specific story has a page speed which is below average, which is a good thing. It means it loads faster than the rest of the site. This specific story is in red, so it's loading at a at a slower speed than the rest of the site, and that's the problem. Essentially, that's the problem because speed is one of the top factors that impact engagement. If your site is too slow, if your site takes more than 3 seconds to load, you might lose 50% of your incoming users, right? And that's not stats from us. That's just stats from the web. Speed is critical, and in certain cases, right, there are very easy fixes. Typically, like, for example, if everything is in green, right, you can see the rest of the stories are actually in green. This one is in red. So this one particularly has a below average page speed. The question that here, at least for me, that triggers is there something on this story particularly which is impacting speed? Typically, is there an image that was uploaded to that story that is just too heavy, right? That's a very classic situation. You want to optimize your images, and sometimes, just sometimes, right, an image was uploaded and that image was not updated. Sorry, it was not optimized, right? So so speed is taking a hit. I see that John shared Lighthouse. Google Lighthouse completely. That's a tool for speed that would highly recommend you to check. Karen has a point. She says, my little circles are gray, and I will tell you about that in a second. Now, you can see just at this stage, right, we're looking at the top 5. So some of you might be thinking, okay, that's only the top 5. I want to see more articles because, you know, we have more than 5 articles right now. So if you scroll down, you will see the rest of your articles organized by real-time readers, right? So the number 1 story is the one that was here. The second one is going to appear on my table as a second. So this is where you can go more in-depth, right? If you click on it, and I'm going to do that in a second, we'll show you more details. But apart from just, you know, breadth of articles, or some of you might be thinking, okay, you talked about above average recirculation, above average page speed. The question is like, okay, but what's the average? What's my average recirculation? What's my page speed? Now that's actually, it comes from a dashboard that I closed when I opened the tool because I didn't want to overwhelm you with data. It's here. It's the today's performance dashboard. So I'm going to click on it. And this is where we show you stats at a site level, right? In real time, not on every single story. Typically, I told you that this story has 300 real-time readers, but across all of my sites, I actually have 9,695 readers, right? That's all of those users spread across my sites. You can see that daily visits, in terms of daily visits, I am at 5.75 million visits versus my daily average of 12.9 million. So every day I get 12.9 visits. Right now at 7:28 p.m. US time, I'm at 5.75. I'm at 44%. So that indicates spacing. right? How am I doing during the day? We actually saw many news publishers actually adapt publication cadence based on this indicator, right? I'll give you a very, very, very bad example, but that's all I have at this stage. Imagine, right? Imagine I used to live in Ireland a long time ago. So imagine you're in Ireland, right? You're in Dublin, and it's the middle of March, and you have the most beautiful day that you haven't seen in the last 6 months, right? I mean, sun is shining, it's warm outside. Chances are, right, internet traffic tends to take a hit in those cases. So pacing, right, understanding and adapting to pacing is important because, well, I mean, the conclusion here is that if no one's online, essentially, it's what I'm clumsily trying to say, then from a publication cadence perspective, are there things you might want to, wait until tomorrow, or wait until your best performing times, things that you've seen in the past? That's typically the type of conclusions you can make out of that. You can also see my top geo, right? So no surprises there for most of you. For me, it says Canada. If I click on it, I can actually go at a city level if I want to. My top 5 referral sources. So by referral sources, we mean, of course, traffic sources, right? So those 9,695 users, where are they coming from? If I click on it, you can see I have direct, I have Facebook, I have Google, I have more Facebook, and I have Bing. Casual versus loyal, right? So we told you like every story has a bit of loyal, a bit of casual, but across all of those users that are right now on my site, or today actually, you can see 40% were casual and 60% were loyal. That's actually pretty healthy. That's really, really healthy. It means, that I'm serving both audiences. I'm not focusing just on acquiring new users or just on serving my core loyal readers. I'm doing a bit of both, which is usually a good strategy. So 60% of them are mobile, 40% are desktop. I mean, it's demo data. I guess for most of you, it's more like 80% mobile, 20% desktop. Now here we come to the crunchy stuff, recirculation. This is my average recirculation, right? So it means that when a reader is on a story, there's a 45% probability that that reader will go to another page, right? That's how you should be reading this. My average page speed, it's actually pretty good. I'm at 4 seconds, right? So when we were saying this story here has an above average recirculation, it means that that story has an above average, the recirculation is above 45%, right? And actually, if I scroll down, I told you when you click on a story, you can get the details and you'll see it here, right? So I'm looking at that first story, top geos, top referral sources, this time for the story, right? Not for the site, which is what's here on the right, and performance for today, right? So today, so far, right? This is the amount of loyal and casual that I've had on this specific story, and this is the recirculation of that story, right? That story has a recirculation of 80%, which is way above my average, which is why it's in green. But unfortunately, I'm at 5 seconds of page speed, right? When my whole site is at 4 seconds, and 1 second might not, seem like much, but it is actually a lot, right? 1 second impacts traffic. Now, someone asked the questions, if I read correctly, you're seeing a lot of gray icons. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that, but there are some good news. So the reason why you see a gray icon is for some of you, it's because I think, what time is it in Australia? 9 a.m., 9:30 a.m., 10 a.m.? I mean, it's early in the morning, right, essentially. So what we do here, right, is we look at, for example, this story, how it's doing in real time, but also how it's been doing throughout the day, right? So today, first day for you. Google Analytics has a bit of delay in some accounts, right? It's part of the service level agreements. For some, you don't get Google Analytics data for today with a 2-3 hour window, right? So for example, if it's 9 a.m. for you, you will see your 7 a.m. data, right? Or you might see it way later. So those things for today, those discrepancies, that lag in essentially having the data for today in Google Analytics makes it impossible for us to take your data, right? So that's why you see a bit of gray. It means that it's essentially a bit too soon. When Google Analytics has your data, we'll be able to compare stuff. Unfortunately, there's not really a fix. I mean, the fix that I don't want to talk to you about would be potentially to switch to Google Analytics 360, which is another way of saying you should pay. And I don't want to do that because that's not a good reason enough to pay for Google Analytics 360. So I'm just going to say maybe connect in a few hours, see if there is a difference. In terms of real-time data, though, so these things, not the icons, everything should work accordingly and is accurate. Okay, I'll move across. I'll move forward, not across. There was a question as well on, does this take into consideration video? So it's a yes and a no, in the sense that, for example, let's assume this is a video, right? So there are two ways to look at the performance of video. One, well, this is a page, right? The video itself is part of an article. It's embedded within an article, so it has a URL. So this page, right, will appear potentially under this view or here in the table, assuming it has readers right now on that specific story. But some of you might be thinking, right, but I actually want to understand how my users are interacting with my video content. How many of them are clicking on full screen, right, or mute, right? If your stories start not muted by default, typically looking at how many people mute the video is a good indicator of engagement. Not necessarily a positive one, but it's a good indicator. How many people click on full screen if you have video content? That's actually a great metric for engagement, because if everyone's clicking on full screen, you know that the video is appealing, or at least it's raising interest from your readers. So all of these things, so what I'm talking about here are metrics that are primarily used for video content consumption. All of that is on the second page, right? This is real-time video performance. And you will see here, right, completion rate, unmute rate, full screen rate. So all of the information that are relevant to your video content if you have video content. Now, some of you might see this page with a big red button, right? It says in red, you don't have specific things you need for us to understand your video content. That's because Google Analytics, by default, will not measure engagement with your video players. That's just not how Google Analytics works. So this is where a third tool comes in, and this is more of a technical parenthesis that I'm doing, and I won't stay long on it. But essentially, if some of you have video content and you want to see it within Google Analytics, the consumption of that video content, you want to see it in real-time content insights. If I go back to my tools page, news tagging guide, this is the tool that we've created essentially to guide you to the stuff that you should be measuring in Google Analytics as news publishers. So I'm going to show it to you pretty quickly. You'll see it's very easy to use. I'm going to zoom in. So this is news tagging guide. It's a bit more technical. It's addressed to a more technical audience because it's all about tagging, right? If you want to measure new stuff with Google Analytics, you have to tag certain things on your site. So the way it works is you select your Google Analytics implementation and tell us about what's your account ID. So I'm going to choose just a random one for the example. I'm going to give a random account ID. I'm going to scroll down. And as news publishers, these are the things that we believe you should be measuring with Google Analytics. Typically, I'm going to start right in the middle and not in video analytics. Under user engagement, you'll find things like newsletter, right? So newsletters, we talked about that in News Consumer Insight. Newsletter traffic is very important, very valuable for your own sustainability. So you will see, for example, newsletter signups, right? That's the type of stuff you should be measuring in Google Analytics. Scroll depth, right? Understanding where users drop off when they're on a page. Do they drop at the top of the page or do they drop off at the bottom of the page? That's critical if you're trying to improve how a page is structured, right? Where do we put certain elements? If you have a subscription button, if you have a contribution button, if you have recirculation widgets, how can you figure out where to put all of that stuff on an article if you don't know where the vast majority of your users are dropping off, right? And a lot of publishers assume that their readers make it to the end of the article. So they put a lot of stuff at the end of the articles. When we know, and publishers who have scroll depth know it as well, that on average, users never make it to the end of the page. So if you want to make that happen in Google Analytics, you take this tool, copy paste this code on your site, and you'll be enabling that new measurement, and it will show up automatically in our tools and in Google Analytics, of course. Back to video, because this was the topic. If you have, I'm going to click on video analytics. If you have one of those video players, so it could be YouTube, it could be Vimeo, an HTML5, a JW player, an Envato, Brightcove, those are different brands of video players, right? So I'm going to go with Brightcove just for the example. The only thing you need to do, same usage. Copy paste this on your site if you have a Brightcove player, and Google Analytics will start measuring how your users are interacting with your video content. And more importantly, you will see it here in real time in Real-Time Content Insight. There's no more work to do. It's just a copy paste of a tag. Actually, if you want, I can actually probably show you how it works. So we have a demo site. So this is a Brightcove video player because I told the tool that I have a Brightcove video player. So I'm going to click on play. And you can see here, those are the things that are being measured. This is just an example of this type of information that Google Analytics get, right? So initial click to play, because I clicked on play. Milestone 25%, because I've just passed 25, but I can click on mute, unmute, and even full screen, right? Full screen, milestone 25%, etc., etc. So those are the type of things that are key when you want to improve and optimize video content consumption on your site. For that, you need the data. We've created this specific tool to enable the measurement of all of that, and then Real-Time Content Insights is there to show you, what it means. But essentially, the rest of the data in real-time video performance is exactly the same as the first page, right? It's the same logic. The thing is, we just change a little bit the key data. So instead of talking about recirculation, we look at unmute rate, right, and full screen rate. And once again, always in the dashboard, showing you, what are your averages across your site, so you can easily compare with the performance of each video. Which is why I'm going to move on from real-time video performance. I want to spend a bit of time on historic performance, because this is where it gets also a little bit more, I think, philosophical might be the right word. Now, real-time content insights, RCI, just like NCI, those were tools that were built in close collaboration with news publishers across the last 3 years. And on historic performance, this is what we've seen and across newsroom and across different news organizations. The most common way to analyze content performance, which is a complicated way of saying, answering the question, how did our content perform over the last month, right? How did our stories do? Were they successful? Were they not? There are many ways to look at that. The most common way that we've seen is publishers and newsroom just take, all the articles in the last 30 days and rank them by page or by visits, right? How many page views were generated per story, or how many visits were generated by story? Pretty basic, but in a certain way effective. So what we wanted to add on top of that was just another layer, a bit more granularity in that specific analysis. And I'm going to show you how it works, how this specific page works. And once again, this page is not meant to be, this is the definitive way of looking at content performance. This is just hopefully showing you a different way to analyze how your stories are performing. Let's start on the right here. You can see it says average article data. Oops, sorry, I didn't want to close it. So I'm looking at the last 30 days, right? This is what it says here. And this this performance, right, on every single metric, right, average article data. What we do here per publisher, based on the account Google Analytics that were selected, so on my site, we're defining what's the average performance of a story across the last 30 days. So essentially, on average, on my site, on average, one story generated 123,000 page views, right? From all of those page views, 65%, sorry, from all of the users who read that story, 65% were loyal readers, right? On average, when we publish a story across the last 30 days, one story generates 123,000 page views and engages the readers that engage with that story. 65% of them are loyal readers. The average recirculation of a random average story is 42%. The average newsletter sign-up rate on my site is 1% per story, right? Once again, we're trying to draw the picture of what's the average performance of one story. The social sharing rate is 2%, the comment rate is 3%, and this one we can completely ignore. It's just for the demo and has nothing to do with it. So now I know on my side what's the average performance of one story. Now, what we do here on this specific table that I'm going to grow is we organize all of your stories in the last 30 days per page view. So essentially, literally the example that I gave before I started talking about this page, right? Across the last 30 days, if we were to organize all of my stories per page view, because it says page view rank, this would be the story number 1, right? So I'm going to click on it. You can see your content engagement rank is 1. I'll come back to that. Your page view rank is 1 for that story. Why? Because essentially, you can see here, page views generated by that story, 190,000. This was my most popular story from a page view perspective. Now, I've already talked about the content engagement rank, and I want to show you how it works. So first, I'm going to find a story. For example, that's the one that I want to show. Everything you wanted to know about medicine and were afraid to ask. You can see the page view rank, right? The page view rank is 15. So if I took all of my stories per page views, from top 1 to the last one, this story would come up 15. But from a content engagement rank perspective, that story shows up as number 6, right? So if I was looking only at my top 10 stories, from a page view perspective in the last 30 days, this specific one would never appear because it's number 15 from a page view perspective. From a content engagement rank perspective, it would show up. Now, the question is why? Let's take a look at it. I'm going to click on it, and this is what we see. Page views. Now, that story generated 43,000 pages, and you can see it's in red, essentially because, well, it's way below my average performance for any story, right? Remember what I started by saying that on average, a story generates 123,000 pages on my site. This one specifically generated 43,000, so completely underperforming from a page view perspective. But loyal readers, 73%. So from all of the users who read that story, 73% were loyal readers, which is pretty much above my average, right, at 65%. Look at recirculation. When my average is at 42% for any story, for any given story, this story particularly had 64%, right? Newsletter sign-up rate, well, it's at 1%, but social share rate, 4%. So that story was shared way more than my average. What I'm trying to show you here, clumsily, is that although this story didn't perform really well from a page views perspective, it outperformed on every other engagement metric, right? So here's the question. Is it a problem with the story? Or maybe was it a problem with our distribution strategy or my distribution strategy, right? Maybe I should have pushed that story a little bit more because clearly the engagement is through the roof. The problem here is just pages. So maybe I should have made it more visible. Maybe I should have amplified it a little bit. right? So what the content engagement rank is, right, is that it takes a bit more than just page views. It does a little, a bit of a recipe in the background just to reposition articles based on their overall performance on those other key engagement metrics. And once again, we're not saying that one is better than the other, right? We're not saying that page views are not important. We're just saying that there are other ways to look at content performance, which might, indicate, are there stories you want to replicate just because from a page views perspective they were great? Are there stories you might want to amplify next time, like this one, because the engagement metrics were, excellent, but the page views didn't follow, so maybe distribution wasn't optimized? Are there certain you actually want to stop because page views were bad and engagement metrics were bad too, etc., etc. So just to share another view, the terrible example, I'm a big fan of terrible examples. The terrible examples that I always give, the idea is to differentiate a story about, for example, a cat that did something very funny, the type of stories that buzzes, that trends, that goes everywhere, that generates a lot of page views, right? From a story, for example, about corruption at a city council level, right? Might not generate as many pages as that cat one, but impacts another type of audience, has other key engagement metrics. And we're not saying that one is particularly better than the other. We just say that they serve different purposes. And it's important not to analyze them and compare them with the same lens. Terrible example, of course, but I hope you see my overall point. That's essentially it on historic performance. If you scroll down, you'll also see top articles by key data metrics. So that's another complicated way of saying, actually, I just want to see the stories, who were the most important for my loyal readers, right? So if you click here, we'll show you the top 5 and the actual value of loyal readers who read that story, the top stories in terms of recirculation, etc., etc. I'm happy to move on to the last page, which is super simple. We have 10 minutes left, so I'll do it quickly if that's okay, Neil.
Please, that's perfect. We've got some questions, but just letting everyone know I'm capturing them so we can get to those at the end.
Thanks. So trends in your region is actually very easy for the most simple for the most savvy of you. This would be actually pretty simple. The idea was, we're looking at performance of your content on your site, but some publishers might not have the resources to build, more complex connections with Google Trends to analyze what's going on across the web, right? So this is a simple way to kind of take a step in that direction. What we do is, so we take the key country that is relevant to you. So if you're a publisher in Australia writing to Australian users, the country here will be Australia. I'm in the US. My site is in the US. My users are in the US. So I would see US. And what we do is we show you trending articles in the relevant country. So in the US, it's limited to country level, unfortunately, at this stage. So these are the key topics that are trending in real time. So if you click on it, it actually comes from the real-time tab in Google Trends, which is not available in the API. We're kind of like the only ones who have it. So you can see these are the stories in the US, actually in Canada, because my fake site is in Canada, that are trending right now, right? And you can see, for example, this story, which is about my football team that won against Juventus, has been trending since apparently like 12 p.m., 4 p.m. US time, right? So we show you those key topics, and we allow you to compare that, with your top article for that specific country. So if you have users from different countries, you'll be able to see, match, potentially make decisions on top of that. We're not saying you should cover everything that's trending, but it gives a bit of perspective in terms of, are you covering topics that are clearly being searched for and viewed on YouTube? Because we have the same thing with YouTube trending videos. Once again, I mean, this is super simple, most probably for all of you, but I want to stop here, one, because I'm finished, and two, because I want to make sure I have time to cover the questions.
Anntao, amazing. And amazing, you'd be an excellent skin diver, I think, because I don't think you took a breath that entire 50 minutes. We do have a couple of questions that have been asked. Where to start? Look, it's probably one thing that I really like is the news tagging guide, which I think we probably haven't spoken enough about. Could you just talk quickly about the importance of that and how people can kind of use that?
So my job, my work has taken me to work with many publishers, news publishers directly, and they've provided us with the Google Analytics account because we have no way at Google to access a Google Analytics account if you don't add us manually. And essentially, what we saw, without obviously sharing the data, we show a lot of discrepancy. And a lot of different levels of maturity in terms and savviness in terms of how to use Google Analytics as a news publisher. I mean, you go to Google, your favorite search engine, and you put Google Analytics guide for news publisher, and nothing comes up. You do the same thing for an e-commerce player, you'll find tons of guide on how to use Google Analytics for retail. But for as a news publisher, we felt it was lacking, and essentially that was impacting us because if you don't have the right data in Google Analytics, it's very hard for us to give you insights based on that. So that's why we built this tool. I only covered 2 examples, but you'll find more stuff regarding revenue, reader revenue, subscriptions, and that's the type of measurements that are key for us to be able to give you automatic insights in news consumer insights and in real-time content insights. So I would really invite you to check. The tools themselves will tell you if you're missing something. You'll see a little red icon, which is where you should start most probably.
Amazing. And so we've got a question from Karen Pickering, who's joined us from Washington, DC, or Washington State tonight, or today, wherever you are. She says she's got a very niche website, which is related to horses. Is she going to find content trending around horses, or is it going to provide more broader topics and content?
No, that's an excellent question. And hi, Karen. I'm actually in Maine, so not too far from you compared to most of publishers here on the call. So no, unfortunately, you won't. You will be. Those real-time search trends are focused on the top trends across the country. If I go back to Google Trends, and I'm pretty sure Nick must have a training on Google Trends that I would invite you to take if it hasn't been done. If it's been done already. So in the real-time search trends, you will find different topics, right? So entertainment, business, but for example, sports tend to be the key sports of a given country. So you won't find anything on horse. For horse riding or horse content, I would go to explore topics, right? So for example, if you were to talk horse as an animal, you'll get more information, for example, in Canada, but probably in the US, in terms of the interest per region, the related topics, the related queries. This is where I would deep dive a bit more on your specific topic to get some ideas of trends and interest regarding that topic.
Awesome. And I guess the power of having a view of all of the trends is that you can hopefully find horse-related content or a horse-related angle. At News, we always tried to find a Game of Thrones angle on pretty much every story we had. It was always pretty much trending. There was also a question around exporting data, and particularly historical data. Is there a way to export data from RCI, Anntao?
So not from RCI, definitely from Google Analytics. I didn't say this, but our goal obviously is not to replace Google Analytics, right? Is to give you almost, for those who remember Winamp from the 90s, the skin, so to be able to personalize the data for it makes sense to you as a news publisher. Once you've seen what you wanted to see, my strongest recommendation is to go to Google Analytics, go on the behavior on all pages, I remember, and you'll have all of that description per page that you can clearly export and work on a spreadsheet afterwards if you want to do for example, your own specific sauce and recipe on content performance, right? You get all of those metrics and you say, well, which one matters the most to us?
Perfect. We've got another question here from Nick. He says, I know some journalists bristle at page views as a metric that is used to evaluate their stories. They prefer engagement, and it's my baby, my apologies. We're not killing a small bird in the background. They would prefer engagement and reading more as it shows kind of genuine interest. How does this tool help with that? So how does this tool help with sort of measuring individual stories, I guess?
So, I mean, engagement itself, the metrics that matter is a wide topic across the industry. My advice would be, the way we define engagement, the things we look at are essentially two simple things, right? Visit frequency. That's how we define engagement. If one of your users comes, if a user comes every day, we say, well, that's better than someone who only comes once a week, right? So we should drive towards having them come every day. And then visit depth, right? And by depth, it's always a tough one for me to pronounce. We mean how long do they stay? How much content do they read, right? So all of those things are things we addressed, I hope, in News Consumer Insights. You'll find recommendations to drive more loyalty. So that's the previous session, to get those users to come back, to get those users to stay longer. Real-time content insights, the tool that I showed you today will show you how that's happening in real time, right? So for example, if you feel your recirculation is at 10%, not only across every article, but across your site, that indicates you have a recirculation issue, right? And that's where News Consumer Insight is here. In News Consumer Insight, you'll find a more actionable piece on how to fix recirculation overall, right? And not in real time.
Mate, thank you so much for that. I'm absolutely obsessed with these tools. I genuinely are and love them. So it's so great to hear from you, the man that's kind of in charge of it all. So, mate, thank you so much. We will leave it there. So we're running up on time. Anttao's got to get to dinner. So
yes, I do.
Yes, good man. Breakfast here in Australia. So look, we will get these videos out to you as well. So I'll send through a recording of today's session. Anntao, if you're comfortable, I'll also send through your email, which we did last week.
Of course, I saw. Thanks for that.
No worries.
Yeah, Twitter, I'm super happy to answer all of your questions, and I want to thank you all for your time, and I hope this was useful and entertaining, at least.
Thank you, mate. And if anybody has any questions, if you're welcome to come at us. We don't want you to be a stranger, so you can also email us. So I'm Neil Varcoe at google.com, almost said hotmail.com. Suddenly went back to the 90s. Sleep in this house at the moment. And my boss is Hoppy at google.com. That's Nick Hopkins, who's had to leave a little bit early. But guys, thanks so much for joining us. We'll leave it there.
Thanks, everyone.